Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Garrett Frostborn, and I've been a park ranger in Alaska for 18 years. I'm telling you this story because what happened to me in March 1974 changed everything I thought I knew about the world. If you think you understand nature, you don't. Not really. I came to Denali after my wife Sarah died in a climbing accident back in Colorado. Couldn't handle the mountains there anymore. Every peak reminded me of her. Alaska felt like the right kind of empty. Big enough to get lost in, cold enough to freeze out the memories. I was 42 and figured I'd spend whatever years I had left keeping tourists from getting eaten by bears. The thing about Alaska is, it doesn't care about your problems. The land up here has its own rules, and you follow them or you die. Simple as that. I learned to read weather patterns that could kill you in minutes, track animals through snow deeper than a man is tall, and survive in cold that turns your breath to ice crystals before it leaves your mouth. By 1974, I was stationed at Wonder Lake, 85 miles from the park entrance. Most isolated posting in Denali. During winter, I might not see another human being for weeks. Just me, the radio, and 20,000 square miles of wilderness. I liked it that way. I'd also become something of an expert on the aurora borealis. Started documenting the northern lights for the University of Alaska, taking photographs and measurements. The professors said my data was helping them understand magnetic fields and solar activity. Made me feel useful again, like I was contributing to something bigger than just checking on empty campsites. The Inupiat elders, who sometimes visited the ranger station, had different ideas about the aurora. They called them Tornarsuk, hungry spirits that rode the lights down from the sky. Old Moses, who guided hunting parties through the park, would get this serious look whenever the lights appeared. "Don't listen if they call to you," he'd say. "They want what keeps you warm inside." I always nodded politely. Moses was good people, and his stories helped pass the long winter nights. But I was a man of science. Solar particles hitting the magnetosphere, nothing more. Beautiful? Sure. Mysterious in a scientific way. But not supernatural. That was before March 1974. Before the longest, coldest winter on record. Before the solar maximum that brought aurora displays so bright they lit up the ground like daylight. Before I learned that some hungers can't be satisfied and some spirits never stop feeding. The blizzard started March 15th and didn't let up for 3 weeks. Temperatures hit 50 below zero. My radio barely worked through the interference, and my supply drop was 2 weeks overdue. I was rationing food and burning furniture to stay warm when the call came through. "Wonder Lake Station, this is dispatch. We've got a missing family near your location. Inupiat family of 4, including 2 children. Last seen 3 days ago, heading toward the old mining trail. Can you respond?" I should have said no. Should have told them the weather was too dangerous, that nobody could survive 3 days in this cold. But Sarah always said I had a hero complex. Maybe she was right. Copy that, dispatch. I'll head out at first light. The aurora that night was the strangest I'd ever seen. Instead of the usual green curtains, it came in waves of deep purple and red, pulsing like a heartbeat. My instruments went crazy, compass spinning, electromagnetic readings off the charts. The lights seemed to move wrong too, flowing against the magnetic field lines, like they had their own agenda. I took pictures until my camera battery died in the cold. Then I just stood there watching, feeling something I hadn't felt since Sarah died. Not quite fear, but close. Like being watched by something vast and patient and hungry. When I finally went inside, I checked my equipment 3 times. Everything showed impossible readings, temperature fluctuations that made no sense, electromagnetic activity that should have been physically impossible. I told myself it was just equipment malfunction. Solar storms could mess with electronics, but as I lay in my sleeping bag that night, listening to the wind howl outside, I kept thinking about Moses' stories. About spirits that rode the aurora down to earth, looking for something they'd lost long ago. Something warm, something alive. I found their dogs first. The sled team was arranged in a perfect circle in a clearing about 5 miles from the mining trail. 7 huskies, all alive but wrong. They sat motionless in the snow, staring straight up at the sky with eyes gone milk white. Didn't react when I called to them. Didn't even blink when I waved my hand in front of their faces. I'd seen hypothermia before, but this was different. Their bodies were warm, breath coming in steady puffs. But it was like nobody was home behind those clouded eyes. Like something had reached inside and taken whatever made them dogs. The trail led away from the dogs in a straight line through the trees. Normal enough, except for two things. First, there were only 4 sets of tracks, 2 adults, 2 children, just like the missing family. But second, and this is where it gets strange, there were no drag marks, no signs of struggle. The family had walked away from their dogs in single file, leaving everything behind. I followed the tracks for maybe half a mile before they disappeared. Not gradually, like they'd been covered by snow. Just stopped. Like the family had taken one more step and vanished into thin air. Above where the tracks ended, carved into the bark of a massive spruce tree, were symbols I didn't recognize. They looked old, older than anything European. The cuts were fresh though, still bleeding sap that had frozen into amber tears. That's when I heard the first voice. "Help us." Female voice, speaking English with an Inupiat accent. Coming from up in the trees, but when I looked, there was nothing there. Just branches heavy with snow and the fading daylight. "Hello?" I called back. "Where are you?" Silence, then fainter. "So cold, help us please." I spent the next hour searching every tree in a 100-yard radius. Found nothing. No climbing marks, no broken branches, no sign anyone had ever been there. But I kept hearing voices. Sometimes the woman, sometimes children crying, sometimes what sounded like an old man speaking in a language I didn't understand. Always from above, always from empty air. By the time I made it back to the station, the aurora was already starting. Brighter than the night before, and lower. So low I swear I could hear it crackling like electricity. The lights moved in ways that made my eyes hurt to watch, forming shapes that almost looked like people. My radio crackled to life as I reached for it. Static at first, then voices speaking in rapid Inupiat. I didn't understand the words, but the tone was wrong. Desperate, pleading, like they were begging for something. "This is Wonder Lake Station," I said into the handset. "If anyone's receiving, please respond." The Inupiat voices stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made my blood freeze. "Garrett." My name, spoken in Sarah's voice, clear as day, like she was standing right behind me. I spun around. The cabin was empty. "Garrett, I'm so cold. Why won't you help me?" Sarah's voice again, coming from the radio. But Sarah had been dead for 3 years, and she'd never been to Alaska. I turned off the radio and sat in the dark, shaking. Not from cold, the cabin was warm enough. From fear. Deep, animal fear that something was very wrong with this place. Outside, the aurora pulsed brighter. Through the window, I could see the lights taking shape, human shapes. Dancing figures that moved like they were walking, but 30 feet off the ground. As I watched, one of the figures turned toward the cabin. Toward me. It had Sarah's face. I closed the curtains and didn't look outside again until morning. But I could still hear them out there. Voices calling my name. Sarah's voice, mixed with others I didn't recognize. All of them begging for help. All of them pleading to be let inside where it was warm. When dawn finally came, I found footprints in the snow around the cabin. Bare footprints, human-sized. They started at the tree line and came right up to my door. Then they went straight up the side of the building and across the roof. The prints ended at the edge of the roof, like whoever made them had simply walked off into empty air. I checked the depth. The snow was 2 feet deep, but these prints only went down about an inch. Like they'd been made by someone who barely weighed anything at all. Someone who barely existed. By the 3rd day, I wasn't alone anymore. Ranger Tom Mitchell arrived on a snowmobile just after noon, sent by dispatch to help with the search. Tom was good people, 10 years younger than me, grew up in Fairbanks, knew the country as well as anyone. Seeing another human face should have been a relief. But Tom looked wrong. His eyes were too bright, pupils dilated like he'd been staring at something too intense. When he took off his helmet, I noticed frost patterns in his hair that didn't melt, even inside the warm cabin. "Hell of a ride out here," he said, but his voice had an odd echo to it, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. Saw some strange things on the trail. What kind of strange? Tom poured himself coffee with hands that shook slightly. Tracks that went up trees. Lights moving under the snow. And voices. He looked at me with those two bright eyes. Did you hear voices, Garrett? I told him about the missing family, the dogs, the radio voices. But I didn't mention Sarah. Couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. Tom nodded, like it all made perfect sense. They're calling to us, he said. The lights, they want us to come outside and play. The way he said play made my skin crawl. We found the family that afternoon. They were in their tent, maybe 2 miles from where their tracks had disappeared. The tent was still standing, guy lines tight, no sign of damage. But inside, Christ, I still have nightmares about inside. The family was there. All 4 of them. Sitting in a circle, holding hands, eyes wide open, and staring at the tent ceiling. Just like their dogs. Alive but empty. Breathing but not really there. The tent walls were covered in frost patterns that looked like writing. Inupiat symbols mixed with others I'd never seen. The patterns seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, shifting and changing like they were alive. They went into the lights, Tom said, and there was wonder in his voice. Look how peaceful they are. But they weren't peaceful. Up close, I could see their eyes moving, tracking something invisible above us. Their lips moved too, forming silent words in a language that hurt to hear, even without sound. I checked their pulses. Slow but steady, body temperature normal. But when I touched the father's hand, it was like touching ice, not cold skin, ice. Like whatever had made him human, had frozen solid inside his body. We need to get them to a hospital, I said. Tom laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Hospital can't fix this, Garrett. This is bigger than medicine. This is transformation. That's when I noticed the changes in Tom were getting worse. The frost patterns in his hair were spreading down his neck. His breath came out in thick white clouds, even though the tent was warm. And his shadow moved independently, reaching toward the tent ceiling like it was trying to escape his body. Tom, we need to leave. Now. But Tom wasn't listening. He was looking up at the tent ceiling, following the same invisible something that held the family's attention. Do you hear that? He whispered. They're singing. The lights are singing, and it's beautiful. I couldn't hear any singing, but I could feel something, a pull, like gentle hands trying to coax me upward. Like whatever lived in the aurora was reaching down, offering to take away the cold and the loneliness and the pain. For just a moment, I wanted to say yes. Then I remembered Sarah's voice on the radio, and the hunger underneath the sweetness. Whatever these things were, they didn't want to help. They wanted to feed. I grabbed Tom's arm and pulled him toward the tent entrance. His skin was so cold it burned my fingers. We're leaving, now. Tom resisted for a moment, then suddenly snapped back to himself. The brightness faded from his eyes, and he looked around confused. Garrett? What? Where are we? Family's tent. You were having some kind of episode. But even as we loaded the family onto emergency sleds, I could see Tom fighting not to look up at the sky. The aurora was already starting, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. Brilliant green and purple sheets that seemed to be reaching down toward us. And in those sheets of light, I could swear I saw faces. Sarah's face, the missing family, others I didn't recognize, all calling silently for us to join them in their dance. Tom made it about halfway back to the station before he stopped his snowmobile and started walking toward the lights. I had to tackle him in the snow to stop him from leaving the trail. He fought me like a man possessed, stronger than he should have been, his body temperature dropping so fast I could see ice crystals forming on his clothes. "Let me go," he screamed, but his voice was layered now, multiple voices speaking in unison. "They're waiting for me. They need me." I got him back to the cabin and tied him to a chair with climbing rope. By midnight, he'd stopped struggling, just sat there staring at the ceiling, lips moving in that same silent language the family had spoken. The aurora outside was so bright it lit up the cabin like daylight, and in that light, shadows moved that had no earthly source. Figures dancing just outside the windows, beckoning for me to come out and join them. I spent that night reading Moses's journals. Notes he'd left at the station years before about the old stories, about spirits that lived in the magnetosphere, feeding on the warmth and life force of anything they could catch, about hunger that could never be satisfied, and cold that went deeper than any winter. about how to fight back. The truth was in Moses's journal, written in his careful handwriting between stories about successful hunts and weather patterns. The Tornarsuk are not spirits of the dead, asterisk he'd written. Asterisk, they are spirits of the hungry. Beings caught between the earth and sky during the great cold at the world's beginning. They live in the river of lights above us, but they remember warmth. They remember what it felt like to have bodies, to have weight, to have hearts that beat with hot blood. Every 11 years, when the sun burns brightest and the lights dance lowest, they try to return. They call to us with voices of people we love, people we've lost. They promise to take away our pain if we'll only come outside and look up at their beauty. But they lie. They cannot take away pain because they cannot understand it. They can only feel hunger. Endless, desperate hunger for everything that makes us human. I looked over at Tom, still tied to the chair. Ice was forming on his skin now, real ice, spreading out from wherever the rope touched him. His breathing had slowed to maybe 3 breaths per minute, and his eyes had gone that same milk white as the dog's. But he was still fighting it. I could see the struggle in his face, the part of him that was still Tom trying to hold on while something else tried to hollow him out and wear him like a coat. The aurora outside was descending. Actually coming down, pressing against the cabin windows like luminous fog. In that green-white glow, I could see them clearly now. Human-shaped beings made of light and hunger, their faces shifting between people I knew and strangers I'd never seen. Sarah was there, beautiful and terrible, her face twisted with need. Garrett, her voice echoed from everywhere at once. I'm so cold. I've been cold for so long. Let me in, and we can be warm together. Behind her, dozens of others. The missing family, their dogs somehow walking upright on hind legs, faces I recognized from old missing person reports. All of them pressing against the windows, begging to be let inside, where there was warmth and life to steal. Asterisk, traditional protections. Asterisk, Moses had written. Asterisk, iron filings scattered in a circle, songs sung in the old language, and most importantly, electromagnetic disruption. The Tornarsuk ride the magnetic field lines like roads. Break the roads, break their hold. Asterisk. I had iron filings in my geology kit. I had my Aurora research equipment, electromagnetic sensors, a small field generator I used to calibrate instruments, and I had Moses's phonetic guide to Inupiat protection songs. But using the field generator would mean overloading it, destroying the delicate equipment I'd spent years maintaining, and more importantly, destroying my radio, my only connection to the outside world. The aurora pressed harder against the windows. Cracks appeared in the glass, spreading outward like spider webs. The temperature in the cabin dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. Tom's head snapped up, his milk-white eyes focusing on me with terrible clarity. When he spoke, it was with the voices of a dozen different people. You cannot keep us out forever, Garrett Frostborn. We know what you lost. We know what you want. Let us take away your pain. You can't, I said, scattering iron filings in a circle around my feet. Because you don't understand what pain is. You just know how to eat it. The first window shattered. Aurora light poured into the cabin like freezing water, bringing the voices with it. Sarah's voice, louder now, desperate. Please, Garrett, I missed you so much. Don't leave me cold again. But underneath the sweetness, I heard something else. The sound of infinite hunger. The sound of something that would devour everything warm and alive in the world and still want more. I started singing. My voice cracked on the unfamiliar Inupiat words, but I forced them out anyway. Songs about the sun returning, about warmth that could not be stolen, about spirits that belonged in the sky and must return there. The aurora figures recoiled, but didn't retreat. If anything, they pressed closer, their forms becoming more solid, more real. I could smell ozone and something else, the scent of winter so deep it had never known spring. Tom burst free of his ropes, ice exploding from his body like shrapnel. But when he stood, it wasn't Tom anymore. His face shifted between human and something else. Something that had watched the first dawn from the edge of space and never forgiven the world for being warm without it. You understand now, he said in that layered voice. We are not evil, we are just hungry. And you have so much warmth to share. He lunged for me just as I hit the field generator's overload switch. The electromagnetic pulse blew out every electronic device in the cabin. Lights, radio, heaters, everything went dead in an instant. But it also tore through the aurora like an invisible blade, disrupting the magnetic fields that let the Tornarsuk manifest in our world. Tom collapsed mid-lunge, his body convulsing as whatever had been riding him was ripped away. The aurora light in the cabin fragmented, breaking apart like a shattered mirror. The voices rose to a shriek of rage and hunger, and then silence. Outside, the northern lights retreated to their proper place in the sky, fading to their normal green curtains. The temperature began to rise. The supernatural cold released its grip on the world. I knelt beside Tom, checking his pulse, weak but steady, and getting stronger. His eyes cleared, pupils returning to normal size. The ice that had been forming on his skin melted away like it had never been there. "Garrett?" His voice was his own again, human and confused and beautifully ordinary. What happened? Through the broken window, I could see the missing family sitting up in their sleds, blinking in confusion. Their dogs were barking, normal, healthy, barking that spoke of minds returned to their proper owners. But I knew this was only temporary. The solar maximum would peak next year. The Tornarsuk would return, stronger than before, having tasted our world and found it good. And next time, I might not be strong enough to refuse them. The official report called it a research equipment malfunction during severe electromagnetic storm conditions. The military classified everything, sealed the records, and transferred me to a desk job in Anchorage. Tom got a commendation for heroic rescue efforts under extreme weather conditions. The missing family recovered fully, with no memory of their 3 days in the wilderness. When I asked them what they remembered, they all said the same thing: beautiful lights and singing. I tried to tell my superiors what really happened, showed them Moses's journal, my photographs, the electromagnetic readings from that night. They listened politely and recommended I take some time off, maybe talk to a counselor about PTSD, but Moses believed me. When I visited him on the reservation, he listened to my whole story without interruption. Then he nodded, like he'd been expecting this day his entire life. "The Tornarsuk have been quiet for many years," he said. "My grandfather's grandfather told stories about times when they fed, times when whole villages disappeared into the lights. But never so many people, and never so hungry." "Why now?" I asked. Moses pointed at the sky, where a faint aurora was already beginning to dance. "The sun burns brighter than it has in 100 years, and we have so many machines now, so many things that call to them through the magnetic rivers. They hear all our radio waves, all our electricity. They know how many warm bodies there are to feed on. I've spent the last year learning everything I could about Inupiat spiritual practices, learning the protection songs properly, gathering iron filings and understanding the old ways of keeping spirits in their proper place. Because the solar maximum peaks next winter, and when it does, the Tornarsuk will return. They remember me now. Sometimes, on clear nights when the aurora is particularly bright, I can hear them calling my name. Sarah's voice, still sweet, still promising to take away the pain of losing her. But now I know the truth underneath. They don't want to take away pain, they want to consume it, along with everything else that makes us human. Our warmth, our love, our grief, our joy. They would hollow us out and wear our skins and still be hungry when nothing warm remained in all the world. I'm not the same man I was before Wonder Lake. The cold up there changed me, marked me somehow. I can feel their attention now, a constant weight pressing down from the magnetosphere, waiting for another chance. But I'm ready for them. I've got iron filings and protection songs and an understanding that some hungers can never be fed, only fought. And I've got this story. I'm telling it to everyone who'll listen, posting it places where people might read it and remember. Because next year, when the solar maximum peaks and the aurora dances lower than ever before, some of you might hear voices calling from the lights. Beautiful voices, familiar voices, voices promising warmth and comfort and an end to loneliness. When that happens, remember what I learned in the Alaska wilderness. Remember that not all lights guide you home. Some of them are just trying to lead you far enough from safety that no one will hear you scream. Don't trust the voices. Don't go outside when the aurora moves wrong. And if the lights start reaching down toward Earth, get inside, stay inside, and wait for dawn. Because the Tornarsuk are always hungry. And once they get a taste of your warmth, they'll never stop hunting you. The northern lights are beautiful. But sometimes, beautiful things are the most dangerous of all. Asterisk. Never look up when the aurora dances low, never listen when the lights call your name, and never, ever go outside when the spirits are feeding. Asterisk. Asterisk. If you like this story, there are others. Alaska is full of thin places where the natural world touches something older and hungrier. Places where the old rules still apply and modern understanding means nothing. Asterisk. Asterisk. Stay safe out there. And remember, the wilderness doesn't care if you believe in it or not. My name is Harrison Stormwind, and I've been a park ranger at Katmai National Park in Alaska for 22 years. People always ask me about my last name. Yeah, it's real, and yeah, my parents had a sense of humor. But after what happened in July of 1981, I think maybe they knew something I didn't. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in ghost stories or native legends. I'm a Marine, did 2 tours in Vietnam before coming to Alaska to work with the bears. At 44, I've seen enough real horror to know the difference between what's scary and what's actually dangerous. Bears are dangerous. Weather is dangerous. Tourists who don't listen are dangerous. But spirits and monsters? That was just stories the old folks told. Katmai is home to the world's largest brown bears. We call them Kodiaks up here. During salmon season, you can see 30 or 40 of these massive animals fishing at Brooks Falls at the same time. Some of the big males weigh over 1,000 pounds. I knew every bear in the valley by sight, tracked their family lines for decades. I'd survived 3 charges, trained photographers from National Geographic, and written research papers on bear social behavior. But in July of '81, during the peak salmon run, something changed. It started with the smell. I was doing my morning patrol along the Brooks River when I caught a scent that made my stomach turn. It wasn't the usual fish and bear musk you get used to around here. This was something else. Thick, ancient, like rotting meat mixed with something I couldn't name. The bears were acting wrong too. I'd been watching these animals for over 2 decades, and I'd never seen them behave like this. The big males that normally dominated the best fishing spots were hanging back, nervous. Cubs stayed close to their mothers even when there was no obvious threat. And the strangest thing, they all kept looking toward the same spot upriver, toward the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. That's when I found the campsite. It was about a mile from the falls, hidden in a grove of alder trees. Whoever had been there left in a hurry. Expensive gear scattered everywhere, sleeping bags torn, coolers crushed, and 3 high-end hunting rifles that looked like they'd been run over by a truck. The ammunition was scattered, but none of it had been fired. This wasn't normal. Hunters, even illegal ones, don't abandon thousands of dollars worth of equipment. And the way everything was destroyed, it looked like something massive had been angry. I radioed back to headquarters. "This is Stormwind at Brooks River. I've got what looks like an abandoned hunting camp. Might need to call in Fish and Wildlife." The radio crackled back. "Copy that, Harrison. Any signs of the hunters?" I looked around at the destroyed campsite again. Negative. But something big was here. Real big. That night, lying in my cabin, I kept thinking about what I'd seen. The gear wasn't just scattered, it was arranged almost like a warning. The sleeping bags were shredded and laid out in a circle. The cooking pots were stacked in a neat pile, but crushed flat as pancakes. And those rifles, bent and twisted like someone had grabbed them and tied them in knots. I'd seen what angry bears could do to campsites. This wasn't that. I thought about calling my wife Sarah back in Anchorage, but what would I tell her? That after 22 years of dealing with every kind of wildlife emergency, I'd found something that didn't make sense? She worried enough about me working alone out here. Instead, I did what I always did when something bothered me. I made a plan. Tomorrow I'd search the area more carefully. I'd document everything with photos. I'd find a logical explanation, because there had to be one. There always was. But as I drifted off to sleep, I kept thinking about that smell. And about the way every bear in the valley had been looking toward the same place, like they were waiting for something to come out of the wilderness. Something that had them all scared. The next morning started normal enough. I loaded my pack with camera equipment, evidence bags, and my standard patrol gear. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, temperature in the 60s. Peak tourist season meant I'd probably run into photographers and wildlife watchers at the falls. But when I got to Brooks Falls, It was empty. In 22 years, I'd never seen the observation deck completely abandoned during salmon season. The parking area, where the float planes usually dropped off visitors, was vacant. Even the bears seemed to have moved on. That's when I noticed the fish. Thousands of salmon were swimming upstream, but they weren't stopping to spawn. They were swimming past their traditional spawning beds like something was chasing them. The water was so thick with fish, it looked like a moving carpet of silver and red. My radio crackled. "Harrison, this is Tom Mackenzie." Tom was the pilot who ran supply flights into the park. "I'm about 10 minutes out with a family of tourists. You seeing anything unusual down there?" I keyed the microphone. "Define unusual, Tom." "Well, I just flew over the valley, and there's this bear standing by the falls. Biggest damn Kodiak I've ever seen. Must be 12 feet tall, and it's standing on its hind legs like it's watching for something. 12 feet. I'd seen plenty of big bears, but even the largest Kodiak males topped out around 9 or 10 feet when they reared up." "You sure about that measurement?" "Dead sure. And Harrison? This thing's got red eyes. Not brown, not black. Red like brake lights." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Tom, maybe you should turn around. Take those tourists to one of the other viewing areas." "Can't do it, buddy. Weather's moving in from the west. This is their only shot." 20 minutes later, Tom's float plane touched down on Naknek Lake. The family he brought in, the Johnsons from Oregon, seemed nice enough. Father, mother, 2 teenage kids, all excited to see their first Alaskan bears. "Where are they?" the youngest kid asked, scanning the empty falls with binoculars. "They'll show up," I told him, but I wasn't sure I believed it. That's when we heard it. It started as a low rumble, so deep I felt it in my chest before I heard it. At first I thought it might be a distant plane or maybe geological activity from the volcanic area, but it kept going, rising and falling like breathing. The Johnson family looked around nervously. "What is that?" the father asked. Before I could answer, the sound changed. It became a roar, but unlike any bear vocalization I'd ever heard. It was too loud, too long, and it had an almost human quality that made my skin crawl. "Maybe we should head back to the plane," Mrs. Johnson said. "Good idea," I agreed. But when we turned toward the lake, Tom was gone. I grabbed my radio. "Tom, this is Harrison. Where are you?" Static. Then, "Harrison, had to leave. Storm coming in fast. Back tomorrow." The radio went dead. I tried again. "Tom, do you copy? Tom?" Nothing. "Are we stranded?" the teenager asked. I forced a smile. "Just for the night. Happens sometimes. We've got a shelter cabin about half a mile from here." But as we started walking toward the cabin, I caught that smell again, stronger now, like it was getting closer. And when I looked back at the falls, I saw something that made me stop dead. There was a bear standing at the top of the falls, but this wasn't any bear I'd ever cataloged. It was massive. Tom was right about the 12-foot height. Its fur was dark brown, almost black, but there were patches of gray around the face that looked like deliberate markings rather than natural coloring. And its eyes were definitely red. The thing that really bothered me was how still it stood. Normal bears are constantly moving when they're fishing, shifting weight, looking around, reacting to sounds. This one stood like a statue, and it was looking directly at us. "Mr. Stormwind?" The youngest Johnson kid was tugging on my sleeve. "Why is that bear staring at us?" I didn't have an answer. Because in all my years of studying bear behavior, I'd never seen one that seemed to be thinking. But this animal, if it was an animal, had an intelligence in its posture that made me deeply uncomfortable. "Let's keep moving," I said. As we walked toward the cabin, I could feel those red eyes watching us the entire way. And when I finally worked up the courage to look back, the massive bear was gone, but I could still smell it in the air. The cabin was basic but solid. One room with 4 bunks, a wood stove, and emergency supplies. I got the Johnsons settled while I tried to figure out our situation. The radio was completely dead, not even static. My satellite phone couldn't get a signal, which was unusual but not unheard of in the valley. "How often does this happen?" Mr. Johnson asked while his wife made coffee on the camp stove. "Weather delays? Pretty regular, but Tom's one of the best bush pilots in Alaska. He'll be back." What I didn't say was that the sky had been clear when Tom left, and I hadn't seen any weather moving in. Something else had spooked him into leaving. Around sunset, the salmon runs stopped. I was checking the area around the cabin when I noticed the river had gone quiet. During peak season, you could always hear the splash and thrash of thousands of fish moving upstream. Now there was nothing but the sound of water over rocks. That's when I found the first body. It was about 50 yards from the cabin, partially hidden under a fallen log. A female brown bear, probably 6 or 7 years old. She'd been killed recently. The body was still warm, but the way she'd died didn't make sense. There were claw marks on her sides, but they were massive. The longest was nearly 18 inches, and they'd gone clean through her ribs. I'd never seen anything that could do that kind of damage to a full-grown brown bear. I was photographing the scene when I heard Mrs. Johnson scream. I ran back to the cabin to find the family pressed against the windows. There, the father was pointing into the woods. Something's moving out there. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the tree line. At first I didn't see anything. Then something shifted between the trees, and I caught a glimpse of dark fur moving through the undergrowth. It was the same bear from the falls, but now it was moving. And it wasn't moving like a normal bear. It was moving with purpose, like it was hunting. "Everyone get away from the windows," I said. "Move to the center of the room." "What is it?" the teenager asked. "Just a bear. But we need to be careful." That was a lie. After 2 decades of working with these animals, I knew this wasn't just a bear. Normal brown bears don't stalk humans. They avoid us, or they charge if they feel threatened. But they don't hunt us with intelligence and patience. The scratching started around midnight. It was soft at first, just a gentle scraping against the cabin walls. I thought it might be tree branches in the wind, but there wasn't any wind. The scratching moved around the cabin in a deliberate pattern, like something was testing the walls for weak spots. The Johnson family huddled together on one of the bunks while I stood by the door with my rifle. The scratching got louder, more aggressive. Long gouges that sounded like they were carving through the wood. Then it stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. I stood there for 10 minutes, listening, waiting, nothing. "Is it gone?" Mrs. Johnson whispered. Before I could answer, something slammed against the roof so hard the entire cabin shook. Dust fell from the ceiling, and one of the support beams creaked ominously. Another impact, then another. "It's trying to get in through the roof," I said, checking my rifle. "Everyone stay calm." But I wasn't calm. A normal bear might try to break down a door or tear through a window, but they don't systematically test a structure for weak points. This thing was thinking, planning. The impacts stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe it had given up. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps. Not the 4-legged padding of a bear, but the deliberate 2-legged steps of something walking upright. They circled the cabin once, twice, then stopped right outside the door. I could hear breathing. Deep, rhythmic, patient. Then a voice, low and rumbling, spoke a single word in a language I didn't understand. It sounded old, ceremonial. The youngest Johnson boy started crying. "I want to go home." "We're going to be fine," I told him, but my hands were shaking as I held the rifle. The breathing outside stopped. Whatever was out there had moved on, but I knew it would be back. I spent the rest of the night by the window, watching the tree line. Just before dawn, I saw it again. The massive bear was standing at the edge of the clearing, motionless, watching the cabin. But this time, it wasn't alone. 3 normal-sized brown bears flanked it, and they were all looking toward our cabin with the same unnatural stillness, like soldiers waiting for orders. When the sun came up, they were gone. But I found their tracks in the soft earth around the cabin. The normal bears had left regular paw prints. But the large ones' tracks were different. They looked almost human. The rescue plane didn't come the next day. Or the day after that. By the 3rd morning, our food was running low, and the Johnsons were starting to panic. I kept the radio on constantly, hoping to pick up some kind of signal, but all I got was static mixed with what sounded like whispered voices in that same unknown language I'd heard outside the cabin. "We need to try to walk out," Mr. Johnson said. "My wife's diabetic. She needs her medication." I'd been dreading this conversation. The nearest ranger station was 15 miles through dense wilderness, and whatever was stalking us would have every advantage out there. But staying put wasn't working either. "Okay," I said. "We'll follow the river trail. Stay close, stay quiet, and do exactly what I tell you." We left the cabin just after sunrise. I led with my rifle ready, while the family stayed in a tight group behind me. The forest was wrong, too quiet, like every animal in the valley had fled. We made it about 2 miles before we found the hunting camp. It was different from the first one I'd discovered. This camp was older, maybe a week or two. 3 tents, all shredded, camping gear scattered and destroyed. But this time, there were bones. Human bones, picked clean, and arranged in a careful circle around what had been the fire pit. Mrs. Johnson threw up. The kids started crying. Mr. Johnson just stared at the scene with wide eyes. "This is what happened to the hunters," I said quietly. "We're going to die out here," the teenager whispered. "No, we're not." But I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. That's when I saw the old man. He was sitting on a fallen log about 30 yards away, like he'd been waiting for us. Native Alaskan, probably in his 70s, wearing traditional clothes that looked like they'd been well maintained but old. Very old. "You shouldn't have come here," he said in clear English. I kept my rifle pointed down but ready. "Who are you?" "My name is Joseph Wasili. I'm a Lutiak. My people have been the guardians of this valley for 1,000 years. "Guardians of what?" He pointed toward the bone circle. "Those men came here to kill the sacred bear, the mother who feeds the salmon, who keeps the balance. They shot her during the spawning ceremony." "What spawning ceremony?" "Every year, when the salmon return, the great mother bear comes to Brooks Falls to bless the run. She's been doing this since the world was young. The salmon know her, trust her. Through her, all the bears know when and where to fish without destroying the run." I felt something cold crawl up my spine. The bear we've been seeing? Kodluag. The bear spirit. When the sacred mother was killed, the balance was broken. Kodluag woke up to fix it. That's just a legend. The old man smiled sadly. "Is it? You've seen him, haven't you? 12 feet tall, red eyes, moves like a man but fights like a bear." I had seen him. We all had. "What does he want?" "Justice. Balance. The men who killed the sacred bear are dead, but their presence here, their disrespect, it's awakened something that's been sleeping for decades. Kodluag won't rest until the balance is restored." "How do we restore it?" Joseph looked at the Johnson family, then back at me. "Someone has to take the place of the sacred bear. Someone has to promise to protect the salmon, to maintain the balance." "You mean sacrifice someone?" "I mean someone has to be willing to stay, to become the guardian this valley needs." Before I could respond, we heard it. That deep, rumbling roar from somewhere close. Too close. "He's coming," Joseph said. "You need to decide now." Through the trees, I could see movement. Dark fur, massive size, those red eyes gleaming in the shadows. Kodluag had found us. The Johnson family pressed against me, terrified. I raised my rifle, but Joseph put a hand on my arm. "Bullets won't stop him. He's not really alive anymore. Not in the way you understand. But he can be bargained with." The massive bear emerged from the tree line. 12 feet tall, just like Tom had said, but seeing it up close was different. This wasn't just a large animal. There was an intelligence in those red eyes, an ancient anger that went beyond anything natural. Kodluag spoke, the same rumbling words I'd heard outside the cabin. Joseph translated. He says, "The valley has been violated. The sacred laws have been broken. Blood must pay for blood. Tell him I'll stay." I said, "Tell him I'll be the guardian." Joseph spoke in the ancient language. Kodluag listened, then responded. "He wants to know why you would do this, why you would give up your human life for strangers." I looked at the Johnson family, scared, innocent people who just wanted to see some bears. Then I thought about Sarah, waiting for me back in Anchorage. About the 2 sons I was putting through college. "Because it's my job," I said. "I've been protecting this valley for 22 years. I'm not going to stop now." Joseph translated again. Kodluag studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The bear spirit approached me, moving with deliberate steps. When he was close enough to touch, he placed one massive paw on my shoulder. I felt a shock of cold energy run through my body, like being struck by lightning made of ice. Images flashed through my mind. The valley as it had been centuries ago, filled with indigenous people who understood the balance between humans and nature. The first European explorers, the gradual destruction of the old ways, the establishment of the park, the return of some protection, but never the deep spiritual connection that had kept things stable for so long. And now, my role in that continuing story. When the vision stopped, Kodluag stepped back and spoke one final time. "He says you are accepted," Joseph translated, "but the contract is binding. You cannot leave this valley. Your life is tied to its protection now." I understood. "Will the others be safe?" "Yes, Kodluag will guide them out." I turned to the Johnson family. "Follow Joseph and the bear. Don't look back, don't ask questions. Just go home and forget this place exists." They wanted to argue, to thank me, to do something. But there wasn't time. Kodluag was already moving toward the trail, and Joseph was gathering them up. As they disappeared into the forest, I stood alone in the clearing, surrounded by the bones of men who hadn't understood what they were destroying. I was the guardian now, for better or worse. That was 44 years ago. The official report says that Harrison Stormwind died in a bear attack while protecting tourists in Katmai National Park. There's even a memorial plaque at the visitor center. But I'm still here. I don't age the way I used to. Don't need food or sleep like before. The cold doesn't bother me, and I can smell things from miles away. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still human, or if I'm becoming something else. Something like Kodluag. The Johnson family made it out safely. Tom found them at the lake 3 days later, guided there by an unusually intelligent brown bear that disappeared as soon as the plane arrived. They never talked about what really happened. I think Joseph made them understand that some stories are too dangerous to tell. My wife Sarah received my pension and life insurance. She remarried after a few years to a good man who treats her well. My sons finished college and have families of their own now. Sometimes I watch them from a distance when they visit Alaska, but I can never approach. That part of my life is over. The valley is different now, safer, but in ways most people don't notice. The salmon runs have been perfect for 4 decades. The bear population is stable and healthy. Poachers and illegal hunters have a tendency to get lost or have equipment failures that force them to leave empty-handed. And sometimes, when someone shows up with bad intentions, they simply disappear. I'm not the only guardian anymore. There are others like me scattered across Alaska. Park rangers, fish and game wardens, native elders who made similar bargains with similar spirits. We don't talk much, but we know each other. We nod when we pass on remote trails. We share information about threats to the places we protect. The old ways are coming back, slowly. More people are learning to respect the wilderness instead of just using it. Climate change and development pressure mean we have new threats to deal with, but we adapt. Kodluag still walks the valley during the salmon runs. He's more at peace now, less angry. Sometimes we patrol together, a 12-foot bear spirit, and a man who's forgotten what it feels like to be entirely human. I'm telling you this story because things are changing again. The balance we've maintained for 40 years is under pressure. There are people who want to open the park to more development, more exploitation. They think the old stories are just superstition. They're wrong. If you ever come to Alaska, remember this: respect the wilderness and it might tolerate you. Violate its sacred places, and something will come to restore the balance. The guardians are always watching, and we have very long memories. Some people ask me if I regret the choice I made that day in the woods. The answer is complicated. I miss my human life, miss my family, miss the simple things like a hot meal and a warm bed. But I've seen what this valley was like before the protection, and I know what it would become without guardians. Every year, I watch thousands of salmon spawn in pristine waters. I see bear families teach their cubs to fish in peace. I witness moments of perfect natural balance that most humans never get to experience. And every year, I remember that some things are worth protecting, no matter what the cost. The beast of Katmai isn't the monster in this story. We are. My name is Elena Northstar, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. Most people think that means I hand out trail maps and chase tourists away from bear cubs. But here in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle, my job is different. I track caribou herds across endless frozen ground. I study how animals survive in a place that wants to kill everything that breathes. September 1987 was when I learned that some things in the Arctic are better left unstudied. I grew up in Anchorage, but my grandmother was full Gwich'in. She used to tell me stories about the old days, about spirits that lived in the empty places. The Ajirak, she called them. Shapeshifters, tricksters. Things that could look like your best friend or your own reflection, leading you deeper into the white until you forgot which way was home. "Elena," she'd say, stirring caribou stew over the fire, "the land up north isn't empty. It just looks that way to people who don't know how to see." I was an anthropologist before I became a ranger. I studied those stories in college, wrote papers about them. Cultural mythology, I called them. Fascinating insights into indigenous psychology. That's what happens when you grow up in the city. You learn to think with your head instead of your blood. The research team that went missing was studying climate change effects on caribou migration. 3 scientists from the University of Alaska, all good people. Dr. Sarah Chen specialized in animal behavior. Marcus Webb was a climatologist who'd spent 5 winters in Antarctica. Dr. James Running Bear was a Gwich'in elder and wildlife biologist, CHE. Probably the only man alive who understood both traditional knowledge and modern science. They'd been camped at Starvation Lake for 2 weeks. The name should have been a warning, but scientists don't think like that. They see data points and research opportunities. They don't see the way the land holds its breath when you're not supposed to be there. Their last radio check was September 15th, 6 p.m. sharp, same as every day. "All good here, Elena. Caribou numbers looking strange, but we're getting great footage. Weather holding steady. See you in 3 days." Then nothing. The storm moved in that night. Not unusual for September, but this one felt different. It came from the north instead of the west, and it moved too fast. By morning, the wind was screaming across the tundra at 60 miles per hour, and the temperature had dropped 30 degrees. I tried raising them on the radio every hour. Static. Dead air. Then, just before noon, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Voices in the static, speaking Gwich'in. The hunt begins when the watchers forget how to see. I don't speak much Gwich'in, city kid, remember? But I knew enough to understand that much, and I knew no one on that research team except Dr. Running Bear could speak the language. The storm cleared by evening, sudden and complete like someone had flipped a switch. The silence afterwards was wrong. In the Arctic, there's always sound, wind over ice, the distant crack of shifting permafrost, the calls of ptarmigan and snow buntings. But that night, everything was quiet. I radioed for a helicopter extraction the next morning. Policy says we investigate any missed check-in within 24 hours, but the pilot wouldn't fly in those winds. Soon as the weather cleared, we'd head out to Starvation Lake. I spent that night checking my gear. Rifle loaded, GPS charged, emergency beacon tested, standard search and rescue protocol. I'd done it a dozen times before. Find lost hikers, patch up injuries, call for evacuation. Routine. But I kept hearing my grandmother's voice. Some places test whether you belong there before they let you leave. The flight to Starvation Lake took 40 minutes through morning air so clear you could see mountains 100 miles away. Pilot Jake Morrison had been flying the Arctic for 20 years. Nothing spooked him. But even he was quiet as we approached the research site. "Caribou," he said, pointing down. The herd stretched across the tundra for miles. Thousands of animals, maybe tens of thousands. But they weren't moving. They stood perfectly still, all facing north, like they were waiting for something. "Never seen them do that," Jake muttered. The research camp looked normal from the air. 3 orange tents arranged in a triangle, equipment scattered around, solar panels catching the low sun. But as we circled lower, I noticed the silence. No smoke from their stove. No one came out to wave. Jake set us down 50 yards from the camp. The rotor wash should have brought the team running, but nothing moved except loose gear dancing in the wind. I grabbed my pack and rifle. "Keep the engine running." "You bet." The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not death, that has its own sharp tang in the cold. This was different. Like ozone before a lightning strike, but mixed with something else. Something organic and wrong. The camp was perfectly preserved. Breakfast dishes sat on the folding table, food still on the plates but frozen solid. Coffee in metal cups, black as tar and just as frozen. The stove was cold, but the propane was still connected. Everything looked like they'd stepped away 5 minutes ago. Except for the tracks. They led away from the camp in 4 different directions. 4 sets of human footprints in the soft tundra mud, each heading toward a different compass point. But Dr. Running Bear had been wearing size 12 hiking boots, and I could see those prints heading both north and south. Same boots, same wear pattern on the left heel. I followed the southern tracks first. They led straight across the tundra for maybe 200 yards, then just stopped. Not at a rock or stream or any obstacle. They ended in the middle of nowhere, like whoever was walking had just vanished into thin air. The northern tracks did the same thing. I keyed my radio. "Jake, you see anything moving out there?" "Negative. It's like a graveyard out here." I went back to the tents. Dr. Chen's was neat as always. Sleeping bag rolled tight, research notes stacked and organized. But her camera was missing. She never went anywhere without that camera. Marcus Webb's tent was different. Gear scattered everywhere, like he'd left in a hurry, but his GPS unit was still there, and when I turned it on, it showed our location as 30 miles southeast of where we actually were. The map screen kept flickering, showing terrain features that didn't exist. Dr. Running Bear's tent was the strangest. All his gear was arranged in a perfect circle around his sleeping bag. Traditional Gwich'in hunting arrangement, my grandmother would have called it. But Dr. Running Bear was a scientist. He didn't follow the old ways. I found their video equipment inside the main research tent. The battery was dead, but I had spare power packs. When the screen flickered to life, I saw the last recording they'd made. Dr. Chen's voice, excited. Day 14, September 15th. We're seeing unprecedented behavior in the caribou population. They've completely stopped their migration pattern and are congregating in massive numbers. It's almost like they're waiting for something. The camera panned across the herd. Thousands of animals, but they were moving normally, grazing and walking. Not like the frozen statues I'd seen from the air. Dr. Running Bear appeared on screen. Traditional knowledge speaks of times when the animals gather like this, usually before major weather events, or... He paused, looked directly into the camera. Before the Ijirak begin their hunt. "Come on, James," Marcus Webb's voice from behind the camera. "You don't really believe those stories. My grandfather saw caribou gather like this once, in 1943. 3 hunters went missing that winter. Never found them. But people heard voices in the wind for months after, calling their names." The video cut out there. I checked the timestamp. 5:47 p.m., September 15th. 13 minutes before their last radio check. But I could hear Dr. Chen's voice on the recording, and I distinctly remembered it being Marcus who'd called in that night. I rewound and played it again. Same voices, same timestamp. But now I was sure. Dr. Chen had made the radio call, not Marcus. My hands were shaking as I packed up the equipment. The wind was picking up again, and the caribou herd was still frozen in place, all those thousands of animals staring north like they were waiting for permission to move. I made it back to the helicopter just as Jake started getting nervous. "Find anything?" "They're gone. No sign of where or why." "What about those tracks you were following?" I looked back at the camp. From here, I could see all 4 sets of footprints leading away in different directions. But there was a 5th set now, heading east toward a ridge I hadn't noticed before. Fresh prints, made while I was in the tents. "Jake, we need to leave." Now. We flew back to headquarters in silence, but my mind was racing. Standard procedure said to call in a search and rescue team, maybe bring in state troopers if foul play was suspected. But what would I tell them? That people had vanished, leaving impossible tracks? That GPS units were showing fictional terrain? That 10,000 caribou were standing at attention like soldiers waiting for orders? I spent the night writing my report, trying to make it sound rational. Research team missing under unknown circumstances. Evidence suggests rapid departure from camp. Weather conditions may have disoriented subjects. Recommend immediate search operation. The truth was locked in my desk drawer, along with the video equipment. The search team arrived 2 days later. 6 rangers, 2 state troopers, and a helicopter crew. Professional, thorough, experienced. They found exactly what I'd found, nothing useful. "Strangest thing," said Trooper Williams on the second day. "We flew grid patterns for 8 hours yesterday. Covered every square mile within walking distance of that camp. Didn't see a single human track except yours, Elena. But I'd seen those tracks. 4 sets, leading away from camp, then 5. I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't mistaken." On the 3rd day, things got worse. Marcus Webb walked into our temporary command post at noon, looking confused and slightly frostbitten. He was wearing summer clothes and had no memory of the past week. "Where is everyone?" he asked. "We were supposed to break camp this morning." The medic checked him over while I asked questions. Last thing Marcus remembered was going to sleep on September 14th. He thought it was September 15th now. When we told him it was the 18th, he laughed. That's impossible. I was just in my tent. Sarah was making coffee, and Dr. Running Bear was checking his instruments. They're probably wondering where I went. We showed him photos of the abandoned camp. The confusion in his eyes was genuine and terrifying. I don't understand. Where are they? Neither did we. Marcus was evacuated for medical observation, and the search operation was officially called off. 2 people still missing, presumed dead from exposure. Case closed. Except I couldn't close it. I went back to Starvation Lake alone 3 days later, against every regulation in the book. The caribou herd was gone, scattered back to their normal migration pattern. The camp had been removed by the search team, nothing left but tent stakes and fire rings. But the tracks were still there, not the ones from before. New tracks. Fresh human footprints circling the old campsite in a spiral pattern, getting smaller and smaller until they reached the center where Dr. Running Bear's tent had been. Then they stopped. I followed them with growing dread. The prints were clear in the soft ground, made by hiking boots I recognized. Size 8 women's boots with a distinctive star pattern on the sole. My boots. According to those tracks, I'd walked in a spiral pattern around the campsite sometime in the past day. But I'd never been there since the search operation. I was sure of it. I checked my own footprints where I'd just walked. Same star pattern, same size 8 boots. But I was wearing those boots right now, and they'd never made the spiral tracks. The sun was setting, and the temperature was dropping fast. Time to leave. But as I turned back toward my snowmobile, I heard something that stopped me cold. My own voice, calling from across the tundra. "Elena, over here, I found something." The voice was coming from the north, maybe a quarter mile away. I could see a figure waving at me from a small rise. Same height as me, same hair color, wearing the same Park Service jacket. "Elena, you need to see this." I drew my rifle and started walking toward the voice. The figure stayed where it was, still waving, still calling my name in my own voice. As I got closer, I could see the details more clearly. It was me. Exactly me, down to the small scar on my left cheek from a childhood fall. But the eyes were wrong, too bright, too knowing. "You're not real," I called out. The thing that looked like me smiled. "Neither are you, sometimes." I stopped 50 feet away and aimed my rifle at its chest. "Where are Dr. Chen and Dr. Running Bear?" "Learning to hunt," it said in my voice. "Learning to see, learning to belong. Bring them back." It laughed, a sound like wind through ice caves. They chose to stay. The land tested them, and they decided they belonged here more than there. That's not possible. Many things are possible when you stop thinking like the city taught you. The thing tilted its head, studying me. "Your grandmother knew that. She tried to teach you, but you forgot how to listen." The mention of my grandmother sent cold fear through my chest. "You don't know anything about her." "I knew her well," it said, and suddenly it wasn't wearing my face anymore. It was my grandmother, exactly as she'd looked 20 years ago, down to the beaded bracelet she'd worn every day of her life. "Elena, child, you came back to us at last." I kept the rifle trained on it, but my hands were shaking. "You're not her. I am what she was. What she became when she learned to see properly. The land remembers everything, child. Everyone who belongs here becomes part of the remembering. Where are the researchers? Becoming what they need to become." Dr. Chen sees with the eyes of the caribou now. Marcus Webb flies with the wind. Dr. Running Bear walks the old paths, hunting as his ancestors hunted. They're dead. They're more alive than they ever were in your world of measurements and instruments. It stepped closer, and I could smell the wood smoke and tanned hide that had always clung to my grandmother's clothes. "You can join them. You have the blood for it. You just have to stop being afraid of what you really are." I ran. The thing didn't follow me, but I could hear it laughing as I reached my snowmobile. The engine started on the first pull, small miracle, and I headed south as fast as the machine could carry me. But the landscape was wrong. The ridge where I'd parked should have been a straight shot south to the main trail. Instead, I found myself climbing hills that hadn't been there before, following valleys that curved back on themselves. My GPS showed I was moving in circles, even though I was holding a steady course. After an hour of driving, I stopped to check my bearings. The sun was setting in the north. That was impossible. In September, in Alaska, the sun set in the southwest. But there it was, a red disk sinking behind mountains that faced the wrong direction. I turned around and headed back the way I'd come. The sun moved with me, still setting in the north, no matter which direction I traveled. The fuel gauge showed a quarter tank. Should be enough to get back to headquarters, but only if I could find the right direction. I tried the radio. Nothing but static filled with whispers in Gwich'in. As full darkness fell, I saw lights in the distance. A campfire, maybe, or the electric glow of research equipment. I drove toward it, hoping to find shelter for the night. The lights belonged to the research camp. Same 3 orange tents in the same triangle pattern. Same equipment scattered around the fire pit. But this time, people moved between the tents. Dr. Chen was hanging solar panels on a makeshift rack. Marcus Webb was checking weather instruments. Dr. Running Bear sat by the fire, writing in a notebook. All of them looked exactly like themselves. No wrongness in their faces, no strange brightness in their eyes. Just 3 scientists doing their jobs. I parked the snowmobile and walked into camp, rifle ready. Elena, Dr. Chen looked up with a smile. Perfect timing. We were just discussing the migration data. You've been missing for a week, I said. Missing? Marcus laughed. We've been right here. You talked to us on the radio yesterday. That was 6 days ago. Elena, are you feeling all right? Dr. Running Bear stood up, genuine concern on his face. You look confused. They were so normal. So perfectly themselves. But I remembered the abandoned camp, the frozen food, the impossible tracks. Either I was losing my mind, or these weren't the real researchers. Show me your hands, I said, keeping the rifle trained on Dr. Chen. She held them up, puzzled. Elena, what's wrong? Her hands looked normal. Right number of fingers, right scars and calluses. But when she moved them, her shadow on the tent wall had too many joints. You're not real. I'm as real as you are, she said. The question is whether you're real enough to belong here. The facade dropped like a curtain falling. Their faces became fluid, shifting between human features and something else. Something that had never been human, but had learned to wear human shapes. We are Ijarak, said the thing wearing Dr. Running Bear's face. Guardians of the sacred places. Teachers of the old lessons. Where are the real researchers? Safe, learning, becoming what they chose to become. The Marcus thing gestured toward the fire. Sit. Let us tell you why you're really here. I didn't lower the rifle. I'm here to find missing people. You're here because the land called you, because your grandmother's blood remembers what your mind forgot, the doctor. Chen Thing moved closer. You think you're a scientist like them, but you're something older. Something that belongs to the old ways. I don't believe in the old ways, but they believe in you. The fire flared higher, and in the flames I saw images. My grandmother, as a young woman, walking across the tundra with a rifle and a pack, following caribou herds, reading weather signs, surviving in places that killed other people. She hadn't been just telling stories by the fire. She'd been teaching me. She saw the Ijarak, said Dr. Running Bear's voice. They tested her, and she proved worthy. She became a bridge between your world and ours. What happened to her? She's still here, part of the land now, part of the remembering. She sent dreams to call you north. That hit like a punch to the stomach. I'd been having dreams about the Arctic for months before taking this assignment. Dreams of walking endless white landscapes, of voices calling my name in languages I didn't understand. You want to add me to your collection? We want to offer you a choice, said the Chen Thing. Stay in your world of measurements and instruments, spending your life studying things you'll never truly understand. Or learn to see with older eyes. Learn to hunt with the wind and speak with the animals. Learn to belong. And if I refuse, then you leave, and you never speak of what you've seen. The missing researchers stay missing. The reports get filed and forgotten, but you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that you turned away from your true heritage. The fire dimmed, and in the growing darkness, I could see their true forms. Tall figures with 2 long limbs and faces that shifted like smoke. Ancient things that had walked this land since before humans crossed the Bering Strait. Where are Dr. Chen and the others? Show me they're really alive. The largest Ijarak gestured toward the darkness beyond the firelight. 3 figures stepped into view. The researchers looked exactly as they should, but they moved differently. More fluid, more aware, like they could see things invisible to normal eyes. We chose to stay, said the real Dr. Chen, to learn the old sciences. There's so much more to know than what we can measure with instruments. They offered us a choice, added Marcus Webb. We could return to the university and spend our careers guessing about climate patterns, or we could learn to speak directly with the land. Dr. Running Bear nodded. My grandfather always said the spirits would call me home eventually. I thought he was being metaphorical. They looked happy, more alive than I'd ever seen them. But there was something else in their faces, something that hadn't been there before. A wildness that belonged to the old world, not the new one. The choice is yours, Elena Northstar, said the Ajirak, who wore my grandmother's face. Granddaughter of those who knew how to see. I lowered the rifle, not because I trusted them, but because I finally understood. The missing researchers weren't prisoners, they were students. The Ajirak weren't monsters, they were teachers. And I wasn't just a park ranger investigating disappearances, I was my grandmother's granddaughter, finally coming home. If I stay, what happens to my life? My job? Elena Northstar, the park ranger, disappears during a rescue operation, said the Chennai Ajirak, tragic but not uncommon in the Arctic. But Elena Northstar, the bridge walker, continues her work, helping both worlds understand each other. I need time to think. Take all the time you need, but know that some choices have deadlines. The fire died to embers, and the camp faded around me like morning fog. I found myself standing alone on the tundra with my snowmobile, the real research camp nowhere in sight. But my GPS was working again, and the stars showed the right directions. I made it back to headquarters just as my fuel ran out. My official report was simple. Extensive search revealed no trace of missing researchers, presumed dead from exposure. Case closed. But that wasn't the end. The dreams came every night after that. My grandmother's voice calling me back to Starvation Lake. Images of caribou herds moving in patterns that revealed the future weather. Visions of hunting with the wind, of seeing through the eyes of Arctic foxes, of understanding the conversations that rocks have with ice. I lasted 3 months before I went back. They were waiting for me, of course. The Ajirak and the researchers who'd chosen to stay. They taught me things my anthropology professors never mentioned. How to read the mood of the aurora, how to find water by listening to permafrost, how to hunt in ways that honored both predator and prey. I learned that the Arctic isn't empty at all. It's full of voices and stories and ancient knowledge that science barely touches. I learned that my grandmother's tales weren't mythology. They were field guides for navigating a world deeper than the one most people see. The Elena Northstar who writes this account is not the same person who flew to Starvation Lake in September 1987. That woman died on the tundra, and something older was born from her bones. I still work as a park ranger, officially. But my real job is translation. Helping scientists understand what the land is trying to tell them, helping the land understand what the scientists need to know. It's lonely work, standing between two worlds that don't quite trust each other. But it's important work. Climate change isn't just about temperature measurements and ice core samples. It's about disrupting relationships that have existed for thousands of years. When the permafrost melts and the caribou can't find their ancient paths, when storms come from impossible directions and the aurora speaks in languages nobody remembers, that's when the old guardians get restless. The Ajirak are still out there, testing travelers who enter the sacred places. Sometimes they offer the same choice they offered me. Sometimes they simply ensure that those who don't belong never find their way home. If you ever find yourself alone on the Arctic tundra and you see someone who looks familiar waving at you from a distance, remember this: the empty places aren't empty, and some spirits will test whether you belong there before they let you leave. Listen with more than your ears, see with more than your eyes. And if your grandmother ever told you stories about shapeshifters and guardian spirits, maybe those weren't just stories after all. The hunt never ends. It just changes who's doing the hunting. My name is Magnus Iceborn, and I need to tell you about something that happened in Alaska back in 1976. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about ice and death. I was a park ranger at Glacier Bay National Park for 20 years. Before that, I worked on ships in Norway, my home country. I came to Alaska after my brother Eric died in a fishing accident in the Arctic waters. The ice took him, and somehow, being around glaciers made me feel close to him again. People always said I had a weird job for someone who lost family to ice, but I understood glaciers better than most. I knew how they moved, how they sounded, how they could kill you if you weren't careful. The massive chunks of ice in Glacier Bay were like old friends to me. I could tell when they were going to break off and crash into the water just by listening to the creaks and groans they made. The Tlingit people who lived in Alaska before anyone else had stories about the glaciers. They told tales about spirits, called Koshtad Ka, ghosts trapped in the ancient ice. According to them, when people died in the cold, their spirits got frozen inside the glaciers forever. I thought it was just old superstition. I was wrong. June 1976 was strange. The weather was warmer than usual, and the glaciers were breaking apart faster than I'd ever seen. Huge pieces of ice, some as big as buildings, were crashing into the water every few hours. The sound echoed across the bay like thunder that never stopped. I was alone at the ranger station near Muir Inlet most of the time. You could only get there by boat, and with all the ice falling into the water, it was getting dangerous for anyone to travel. The Coast Guard had put out warnings, but people still tried to come see the glaciers up close. That's when the tour boat went missing. The boat was called the Arctic Dream, and it had 12 passengers on board. Most were tourists, but there was also a scientist named Dr. Sarah Chen who was studying why the ice was melting so fast. They were supposed to come back to the main harbor by evening, but when midnight passed with no radio contact, I knew something was wrong. The Coast Guard called me at 2 a.m. "Magnus, we need you to help find that missing boat. You know those waters better than anyone." I grabbed my gear and headed out in my patrol boat just as the sun started to rise. The morning was eerily quiet except for the constant rumbling of ice breaking apart. As I got closer to Muir Glacier, I noticed something odd. The water was calm, but there were chunks of ice floating around that looked wrong somehow. They were too clear, too perfect, like they'd been formed in a laboratory instead of broken off from a glacier. I found the Arctic Dream around 10 a.m., and what I saw made no sense. The boat was sitting in the middle of the bay, completely trapped in solid ice, not floating ice that had drifted around it, solid ice that went down deep into the water. The weird thing was, it was June and nearly 50 degrees outside. Water doesn't freeze like that in those temperatures. I radioed the Coast Guard. "I found the boat, but you're not going to believe this. It's frozen solid in place." "What do you mean frozen?" came the reply. "I mean, the whole thing is sitting in a block of ice, like it's been there for months." I tied my boat to a piece of floating ice and climbed across to get closer. The ice around the Arctic Dream was crystal clear, so clear I could see straight through it, and that's when I saw them. The passengers were still on the boat, all 12 of them, but they weren't moving. They were sitting in their seats, standing at the rail, pointing at the glacier, all frozen in place like statues. Their eyes were open. Their mouths were open like they were talking or maybe screaming. But they weren't dead. I could see their chests moving slowly, like they were breathing in slow motion. I've seen a lot of strange things in 20 years, around glaciers, but nothing like this. The ice was wrong. It was too thick, too clear, and it was cold in a way that hurt to touch. When I put my hand on it, I could hear something that sounded like voices calling from far away. That's when I started to think maybe those old Tlingit stories weren't just superstition after all. I spent the next hour trying to figure out how to get those people out of the ice. I radioed for help, but the Coast Guard couldn't get close because of all the falling ice chunks. They said they'd send a helicopter when the weather cleared. I tried using an ice axe to chip away at the frozen surface, but it was like trying to cut through steel. The ice was harder than anything I'd ever seen. Worse, every time I hit it, I heard those voices again, faint, like people calling for help from underwater. While I was working, I noticed other things frozen in the ice around the boat. There was an old wooden paddle that looked hand-carved, definitely not modern. A few feet away, I could see what looked like a metal compass, the kind sailors used 100 years ago. There were other objects, too, scattered throughout the ice like they'd been preserved there for decades. I was starting to get scared, but I kept working. These people needed help, even if I couldn't understand what was happening to them. Around noon, the temperature dropped fast. I could see my breath, which was impossible since it had been warm all morning. The ice around me started creaking and groaning, but not like normal glacier sounds. This was different, almost like the ice was talking. That's when I saw my first Koshta. It was just a shape at first, moving inside the clear ice about 20 feet from the boat. It looked like a person walking, but the figure was blurry and kept fading in and out. I blinked hard, thinking maybe the cold was affecting my eyes, but the shape became clearer. It was a man wearing old-style fur clothing, the kind Alaskan natives wore long ago. He was walking through the ice like it was air, and he was looking straight at me. I stumbled backward and nearly fell off the ice. "Hey!" I shouted. "Hey, can you hear me?" The figure stopped and turned toward me. His face was pale blue, and his eyes were completely white. He opened his mouth, but instead of words, I heard that distant calling sound again. It was coming from him. Then he pointed toward the glacier, and I followed his gaze. More shapes were moving in the ice, dozens of them, people in different kinds of clothes from different time periods. Some wore modern jackets, others had on military uniforms, and some were dressed like explorers from the 1800s. They were all walking toward the frozen boat. I grabbed my radio with shaking hands. "Coast Guard, this is Magnus. I need that helicopter right now." "What's your situation, Magnus?" I looked around at the figures moving through the ice, at the perfectly preserved objects scattered everywhere, at the impossible frozen boat with 12 people trapped inside. How could I explain this? "Just send help. Something's very wrong out here." The radio crackled back. "Helicopter can't fly in this weather. Storm's moving in. You need to get back to shore." I looked up and saw dark clouds gathering fast. The wind was picking up and the temperature was dropping even more. But I couldn't leave these people. That's when I heard my brother's voice. "Magnus." It was faint but clear. I spun around, searching the ice. "Magnus, brother." The voice was coming from deep inside the glacier itself. I knew that voice. I'd grown up with it, worked alongside it on fishing boats, heard it laugh and sing and curse in Norwegian. It was Eric. "Eric?" I whispered. "Come home, Magnus. Come to the ice. We're all here." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Eric had died 5 years ago in waters thousands of miles from here. There was no way his voice could be calling from this glacier. But I heard it again. "The ice remembers everything, Magnus. Everyone who dies here, we're all still here." I looked back at the frozen boat and saw that the trapped passengers had turned to look at me. Their eyes were following me as I moved. Slowly, one of them, a woman in a red jacket, raised her hand and pressed it against the ice from the inside. She was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear her through the ice. The storm hit fast. Snow started falling so hard, I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. The wind howled across the ice, and I knew I had to get back to my boat before I got trapped too. But as I climbed back across the ice chunks to my patrol boat, I could hear Eric's voice following me. "Don't leave us, Magnus. The ice is calling you home." I started my engine and headed back toward shore as fast as I could. But I kept looking back at the strange, clear ice where those people were trapped. And I kept seeing more figures moving inside the glacier. Dozens, maybe hundreds of people, all preserved in the ice, all walking toward the bay. The Koshta were real. And they wanted something from me. I made it back to the ranger station just as the storm got really bad. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I tried calling the Coast Guard again, but the storm was messing with all the radio signals. I spent that night reading everything I could find about the Tlingit stories. In the old books, the Koshta were described as the spirits of people who died in terrible ways in the cold. According to the legends, these spirits got trapped in glacial ice and couldn't move on to whatever comes after death. They stayed frozen, reliving their final moments over and over again. The books said that when the ice started melting too fast, the spirits could wake up and try to add more people to their collection. They wanted others to share their endless, frozen death. I didn't want to believe it, but after what I'd seen, I couldn't ignore it either. The storm lasted 2 days. When it finally cleared, I went back out to find the Arctic Dream. But when I got to where it had been frozen, there was just open water. The ice had melted completely, leaving no trace that it had ever been there. I dove down with scuba gear, thinking maybe the boat had sunk. The water was incredibly cold, colder than it should have been. At about 30 feet down, I found something that made my blood freeze. The Arctic Dream was there, but it wasn't crashed or sunk. It was sitting perfectly upright on the ocean floor, still encased in that same crystal clear ice. The 12 passengers were still inside, still frozen in their exact same positions. But now I could see hundreds of other people trapped in the ice around the boat. There were sailors in old uniforms, explorers in fur coats, fishermen in yellow rain gear, and native hunters in traditional clothing. Some looked like they'd been there for decades, others seemed more recent. All of them had their eyes open, all of them were looking up toward the surface. Looking up at me, I swam back to the surface as fast as I could, my heart pounding. When I broke through, I heard Eric's voice again, much clearer this time. "We've been waiting for you, Magnus. The ice knows you belong with us." I spun around in the water. There was no one there, but the voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You lost me to the ice, brother. Now the ice wants you too." The water around me started getting colder. I could see my breath steaming up from the surface. Then I noticed that the water right around me was starting to form thin sheets of ice, even though it was still June and sunny. I swam toward my boat as fast as I could, but the ice was forming faster than I could move. It was like the water was freezing just to trap me. I barely made it to the ladder before ice completely surrounded my patrol boat. Once I was on deck, breathing hard, I looked back at the water. It was normal again, no ice, just regular ocean water. But I could still hear Eric's voice calling from somewhere beneath the surface. That evening, I called my friend Joe Kahat, an elder from the local Tlingit community. I told him everything I'd seen. "The Koshta Ka are awake," he said, his voice serious. "This is happening because the ice is melting too fast. All the spirits that have been sleeping are waking up angry. How do I stop them?" "You can't stop them, Magnus, but you might be able to help them move on. There are old ceremonies, old songs that can break the ice's hold on the spirits. But it's dangerous. You have to go into their world to set them free." "Their world?" "The place between ice and death, where they're trapped. If you go there, you might not come back." I knew I had to try. Those 12 people from the tour boat didn't deserve to be trapped forever. And if Eric was really down there, maybe I could help him find peace too. Joe taught me the old songs and gave me a traditional ice-breaking tool made from walrus ivory. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said. "It's been blessed by shamans. It might protect you in the spirit ice." The next morning, I went back to the spot where the Arctic dream was hidden beneath the water. This time, I was ready for whatever the Koshta Ka would throw at me. But I wasn't ready for what I found. The entire bay had changed. Where there had been open water the day before, now there was a massive ice field stretching for miles. The ice was that same crystal-clear material I'd seen before, and inside it I could see hundreds of trapped figures. It wasn't just the recent victims. This ice contained everyone who had ever died in these waters going back centuries. Russian explorers, American prospectors, native hunters, modern tourists, all of them preserved in perfect detail, all of them still aware, all of them still experiencing their deaths over and over again. And at the center of it all, I could see Eric. My brother was standing in the ice with his arms outstretched toward me, his mouth open in a silent scream. The Koshta Ka weren't just spirits anymore. They had become something much more powerful. They had turned the entire bay into their supernatural prison, and now they wanted me to join them. As I stood on the edge of the ice field, I heard all their voices calling at once. Hundreds of people who had died in these waters, all begging me to come to them, all promising that the ice would take away my pain and loneliness. For a moment, I wanted to step onto that ice. I wanted to be with Eric again, to stop feeling guilty about his death, to stop being alone. But then I remembered the 12 people from the Arctic dream. They didn't choose this. They didn't deserve to be trapped forever, just because I missed my brother. I took out Joe's ivory tool and stepped onto the supernatural ice. The cold hit me immediately, not just physical cold, but something much deeper. It was like the ice was trying to freeze my soul. The Koshta Ka began moving toward me from all directions, their ghostly figures becoming more solid with each step. It was time for the final confrontation. The moment I stepped onto the spirit ice, everything changed. I wasn't just walking on frozen water anymore. I was walking through the memories of everyone who had ever died here. I could see their final moments playing out around me like movies. A Russian explorer falling through thin ice in 1847, a gold prospector caught in a blizzard in 1899, a fishing boat crew swept overboard in 1962. Each death was preserved perfectly in the ice, happening over and over again for eternity. The Kosh-da-ka surrounded me, but they didn't attack right away. They wanted me to understand something first. "Look," Eric's spirit said, appearing beside me. "Look how the ice remembers everything. Every person, every moment, every death. We're not really dead, Magnus. We're preserved." I could see that Eric looked exactly like he had the day he died. Young, strong, wearing the same blue fishing jacket he'd had on when the Arctic waves took him. But his eyes were different. They held all the pain and confusion of someone who'd been reliving his death for 5 years. "This isn't life, Eric," I said. "This is a prison. But we're together," he said. "All of us who died in the ice, we take care of each other. We don't have to be alone anymore." That's when I understood what the Kosh-da-ka really were. They weren't evil spirits trying to hurt people. They were souls who had died alone and afraid in the cold, and they were so terrified of being alone again that they couldn't let go. They kept adding new people to their collection, not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. "The ice is melting," I told Eric. "Climate change is making the glaciers disappear. If you stay trapped here, you'll all be lost forever when the ice melts completely." Around us, the other spirits began to gather. I could see the 12 people from the Arctic Dream, still in their tourist clothes, but now with the same pale, frozen look as the older spirits. The woman in the red jacket stepped forward. "Help us," she whispered, her voice sounding like wind through ice caves. "We don't want to be trapped here, but we don't know how to leave." I pulled out Joe's ivory tool. It felt warm in my hands, even though everything else was freezing cold. I began singing the traditional song he had taught me, a Tlingit ceremony for helping spirits find their way to the next world. The Kosh-da-ka reacted immediately. Some of them backed away, looking afraid. Others moved closer, looking hopeful. And a few, including Eric, became angry. "No," Eric shouted. "Don't take them away from me. I've been alone in the ice for so long, and now I have friends, I have family." The supernatural ice around us began to crack and groan. With each word of the song, more cracks appeared. The spirits were being forced to choose between staying trapped forever and moving on to whatever came next. Most of them began walking toward the cracks in the ice, their forms becoming brighter and less solid as they approached freedom. The woman in the red jacket smiled at me as she stepped into a crack and disappeared in a flash of warm light. But Eric and some of the older spirits fought back. The ice beneath my feet became unstable, tilting and breaking apart. The temperature dropped so fast that my breath came out in thick clouds. "You can't make us leave," Eric screamed. "The ice is our home now." He rushed at me, and when he touched my arm, I felt his death. Suddenly I was experiencing what he had experienced, falling through ice into freezing water, struggling to breathe, feeling my strength leave my body as the cold took over. The terror and loneliness of dying alone in the Arctic Ocean filled my mind. I understood then why he couldn't let go. He had died afraid and alone, and the ice had preserved not just his body, but also that terrible fear. He would rather stay trapped with other spirits than face the unknown of what came after death. But I also felt something else in Eric's memories. How much he had loved life, how much he had loved sailing and fishing and being with family. The real Eric would never want to trap innocent people just to avoid being alone. "Eric," I said, still singing the ceremony song, "remember who you were before the ice took you. Remember the man who taught me to sail, who made me laugh, who always said that life was meant to be lived, not just survived." For a moment, Eric's angry expression softened. "Magnus, I've missed you every day since you died," I continued. "But keeping you trapped here isn't going to bring you back. And trapping other people won't make your death any less painful." The ice around us was cracking faster now. More spirits were choosing to step through the cracks and move on. With each one that left, the supernatural ice field got smaller and weaker. Eric looked around at the disappearing spirits, then back at me. "Will I see you again?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know you'll be free." He nodded slowly, then stepped toward the nearest crack in the ice. As he touched it, he looked back one more time. "Take care of yourself, brother, and stay away from thin ice." He smiled. The same smile I remembered from when we were kids, and then he was gone in a burst of warm light. The remaining spirits quickly followed, until I was standing alone on the rapidly melting, supernatural ice. The Arctic Dream bobbed to the surface, freed from its icy prison. I could see the 12 passengers moving around inside, alive and confused but unhurt. I swam to their boat and helped them get their engine started. They had no memory of being trapped in the ice. To them, they had just gotten lost in a sudden fog and found themselves drifting in open water. As we headed back to shore, I looked back at where the spirit ice had been. The bay looked completely normal now, just regular water with a few natural ice chunks floating around. But I knew something had changed forever, both in the bay and in me. The Coast Guard officially recorded the Arctic Dream incident as vessel temporarily lost due to unusual fog conditions and navigation equipment malfunction. The 12 passengers were checked for hypothermia and released. Dr. Chen, the glaciologist, published a paper about rapid glacial melting in the area, but she never mentioned anything supernatural. Nobody believed my real report about the Koshda, which was fine with me. Some things are too big and strange for official paperwork anyway. I kept working as a ranger for another 10 years, but everything was different after that day. I started spending time with Joe Kahat and other Tlingit elders, learning about the old stories and traditions. I realized that the native people had been right about the spirits all along. They had just been waiting for the right conditions to wake up. Joe told me that what happened in Glacier Bay was just the beginning. Climate change was melting ancient ice all over Alaska, and that ice held more than just prehistoric plants and animals. It held the memories and spirits of everyone who had ever died in the cold. The old things are waking up, he said. Things that have been sleeping in the ice for thousands of years. And not all of them will be as easy to help as your brother's spirit. I started keeping track of strange incidents around Alaska. Fishing boats found encased in summer ice, hikers who disappeared near melting glaciers and were found days later with no memory of what happened. Towns where the temperature suddenly dropped 40 degrees for no scientific reason. The patterns were clear if you knew what to look for. Ancient supernatural forces were being released as the climate changed, and most people had no idea how to deal with them. I retired from the Park Service in 1987, but I never really stopped working. I became an unofficial consultant for weird incidents involving ice and cold. Law enforcement agencies started calling me when they found cases that didn't make sense. Bodies preserved in impossible ice formations, missing persons who turned up speaking about voices, calling from glaciers, equipment that froze solid in summer temperatures. I helped when I could, using what Joe and the other elders taught me about traditional ceremonies and spirit communication. Sometimes I could help trapped souls move on. Sometimes I could warn people away from dangerous areas. And sometimes I just documented what I saw, building a record for whoever might need it later. The world is changing fast, and the old ice is melting faster than ever. Every summer, more glaciers disappear, and every summer, more supernatural things wake up from their ancient sleep. Most people don't notice because they're not looking for it. They see climate change as just a scientific problem. Rising sea levels, changing weather patterns, melting ice caps. They don't realize that some ice has been frozen for good reasons. I'm telling you this story because you need to know what's coming. The Koshda Ka were just one type of spirit trapped in Alaska's ice. There are others. Older things, stranger things. Things that were buried in ice long before humans ever came to Alaska. As the climate keeps warming and the ancient ice keeps melting, they're all going to wake up. And unlike my brother's spirit, not all of them will be willing to move on peacefully. So if you ever find yourself near melting glaciers in Alaska, listen carefully. If you hear voices calling from the ice, if you see impossible ice formations on warm days, if you feel that deep cold that has nothing to do with weather, get away fast. And remember, some ice has been frozen for good reasons. When it melts, everything it's been holding comes out. Everything. My name is Magnus Iceborn, and I've been a park ranger at Glacier Bay for 20 years. Before that, I spent 15 years on Norwegian merchant ships, watching ice form and break across the Arctic seas. My brother Eric used to say I had ice water in my veins instead of blood. He was probably right. People think being a ranger in Alaska is all about bears and hiking trails, but here at Glacier Bay, it's different. This place is about ice, massive walls of blue-white ice that have been growing for thousands of years. Ice that moves like a living thing, groaning and cracking as it pushes toward the sea. I came here in 1956, right after Eric died in a fishing accident off the coast of Norway. The Coast Guard said his boat got caught in an ice field during a sudden freeze. They never found his body. The ice just took him. That's when I decided I needed to understand ice better. Not just how it forms or melts, but how it moves, how it kills, how it preserves things. The Tlingit people who lived here before the park was established used to tell stories about the glaciers. Old Mary Kahat, who still lives in the village, once told me about something called Koshta Ka, spirits trapped in the ice. She said, when people die in the cold, sometimes their souls get frozen too, stuck forever in the moment of their death. I always smiled and nodded when she told those stories. I'm a man of science. I understand glacial dynamics, ice formation, and maritime safety. I've rescued dozens of people from these waters. I know the real dangers: hypothermia, falling ice, sudden weather changes. Ghosts aren't on my list of things to worry about, but that was before June 1976, when the weather went crazy and the ice started remembering things it should have forgotten. The spring melt that year was unlike anything I'd seen. Usually, the glaciers lose a few feet of ice each summer, calving chunks into the bay with thunderous crashes. But this year, the ice was practically racing toward the sea. Muir Glacier alone had retreated almost 100 yards in 3 weeks. Dr. Sarah Chen, a glaciologist from the University of Alaska, had brought a small research boat to study the rapid melting. She had 3 graduate students with her, kids barely out of college who thought they understood the ice because they'd read about it in textbooks. It's fascinating, Dr. Chen told me when they checked in at the ranger station. The rate of retreat is unprecedented. We're documenting changes that normally take years, happening in just days. I warned them about the unstable conditions. When ice moves this fast, it's dangerous. Underwater shelves can collapse without warning. The boat traffic patterns change. Even the fish act strange when the glaciers are this active. We'll be careful, she promised. We're just taking core samples and measuring water temperature. Nothing risky. They launched their boat on June 15th, heading toward Muir Inlet where the glacier meets the water. It was a perfect morning, clear skies, calm water, temperature around 50 degrees, good conditions for research work. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. The call came in 3 days later. A fishing boat captain reported seeing an empty research vessel floating near Muir Glacier. No people aboard, but the boat appeared undamaged. I took my patrol boat out immediately, radioing the Coast Guard as I headed toward the inlet. The research boat was exactly where the fishermen said it would be, drifting about 200 yards from the glacier face, engines off. But something was wrong the moment I got close. The boat was covered in ice, not frost or snow. Solid, thick ice that looked like it had been forming for weeks. But the air temperature was 52 degrees, and there hadn't been any weather fronts moving through. I tied my boat to theirs and climbed aboard. The research equipment was still running, taking measurements, but everything was encased in crystal clear ice. I could see Dr. Chen's notebook through 6 inches of frozen water, her handwriting perfectly preserved on the last page she'd written. The ice wasn't just on the equipment. It covered every surface of the boat. The deck, the railings, even the life preservers were frozen solid. But it wasn't normal ice. This ice was so clear I could see right through it, like looking through glass. And it was warm to the touch. That should have been impossible. Ice doesn't form in 50-degree weather. And ice definitely doesn't stay frozen when it's warm. I used my radio to call the Coast Guard. This is Ranger Iceborne. I've located the missing research vessel, but we have a situation here. The boat is covered in ice formations that don't match current weather conditions. Copy that, Ranger. What's the status of the missing persons? I looked around the boat again, checking every corner. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just that impossible ice covering everything they'd touched. No sign of the research team, but their equipment is still running. It's like they just disappeared. The Coast Guard helicopter arrived an hour later. Lieutenant Walsh, a good man I'd worked with on many rescues, rappelled down to help me examine the boat. Jesus, Magnus, he said when he saw the ice. What kind of weather system creates this? None that I know of. We tried chipping some ice away from the equipment, hoping to find clues about what happened. But when we hit the ice with tools, it didn't crack or break. Instead, it rang like a bell, making a sound that echoed across the water in a way that made my teeth hurt. That's when we heard the first voice. It was faint, coming from somewhere inside the glacier. A woman's voice, speaking words I couldn't understand. But the tone was clear enough. She was scared. "Did you hear that?" Walsh asked. I nodded. Sounded like it came from the glacier face. We both looked toward the massive wall of ice. Muir Glacier rose 300 feet above the water, its face scarred with cracks and crevices. Nothing unusual to see, but as we watched, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were shapes moving inside the ice. Dark shadows that looked almost like people, shifting slowly through the frozen mass. "Walsh," I said quietly, "look at the glacier, about 50 feet up, near that big crack." He followed my gaze and went very still. Those look like people," I finished. We could see them clearly now. 4 figures trapped inside the glacier, perfectly preserved in the ice. They were moving slowly, like they were swimming through thick water. And even from 200 yards away, I could see they were wearing modern clothing. Dr. Chen's research team. But they weren't dead. Dead people don't move. Dead people don't call out for help. These people were somehow alive inside hundreds of feet of solid ice, and they were trying to get our attention. "This isn't possible," Walsh whispered. I was about to agree when the water around our boats suddenly started to freeze. Not gradually, like normal ice formation, but instantly. The surface went from liquid to solid in seconds, trapping our hulls in place. The temperature hadn't dropped. The air was still warm, but the water was freezing anyway, and I could hear that bell-like ringing sound coming from under the ice. "We need to get out of here," I told Walsh. Now, but we were trapped. The ice held our boats tight, and it was spreading outward in perfect circles, reaching toward the shore with unnatural speed. That's when I heard my brother's voice calling my name from inside the glacier. "Magnus, Magnus, help me." Eric's voice was coming from deep inside the ice, just like I remembered it. Same accent, same tone he used when he was scared. But Eric had been dead for 20 years. "You hear that too, right?" Walsh asked, his face pale. I nodded, though I wished I couldn't. The voice was getting louder, more desperate. "Magnus, I'm so cold. I've been cold for so long. Please help me." The shapes inside the glacier were moving faster now. Not just the research team, but dozens of other figures. I could see them through the translucent ice. People in old-fashioned clothing, Native Americans in traditional dress, what looked like Russian explorers with fur coats and beards. All of them perfectly preserved, all of them moving like they were still alive. The ice holding our boats was getting thicker. What started as a thin layer was now several feet deep, and it was spreading toward shore like a living thing. Wherever it touched, more voices started calling out. I tried the radio, but got only static. The helicopter had moved back when the ice started forming, hovering at a safe distance. "Lieutenant Walsh," the pilot's voice crackled through Walsh's radio. "We're reading some kind of electromagnetic interference down there. Are you both okay?" Walsh tried to respond, but his radio was making the same bell-ringing sound we'd heard from the ice. The sound was getting inside our heads now, making it hard to think clearly. That's when I noticed the water around the frozen research boat was changing. Instead of the normal dark blue of deep water, it was becoming crystal clear. I could see straight down to the bottom of the inlet, 50 feet below, and there were more people down there. Hundreds of them, standing on the seafloor, looking up at us with eyes that reflected light like mirrors. They were all perfectly preserved, wearing clothes from different time periods going back centuries. "They're collecting us," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "What?" "The ice, the glacier. It's been collecting people who died here, preserving them." Walsh stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but it was the only explanation that made sense. Every person who'd ever died in these waters, everyone who'd been caught by the ice over thousands of years, was still here. Still aware. Still trapped in the moment of their death. And now they wanted us to join them. The ice around our boats started to rise, climbing up the hulls like water flowing upward. But it wasn't water. It was solid ice, moving with purpose. Where it touched metal, the metal froze instantly. Where it touched rope, the rope became brittle as glass. "Magnus," Eric's voice called again, closer now. "Don't fight it. It doesn't hurt after the first few minutes. The cold becomes warm, the fear goes away. You just stay." I could see him now, pressed against the inner surface of the glacier face. My little brother, exactly as he'd looked the day he died. Young and strong, but with terror in his eyes that had been frozen there for 2 decades. "We have to get off these boats," I told Walsh. But there was nowhere to go. The ice had spread to shore, and it was at least 20 feet thick now. We were trapped in a circle of supernatural ice that was slowly rising to claim us. That's when I remembered something old Mary Kahat had told me. Not just about the Koshda Ka, but about how to break their hold. Traditional ceremonies, specific words and actions that could shatter the ice prison. The problem was, I'd never paid close attention to those stories. I'd been too busy being a skeptic to learn how to fight what I didn't believe in. The ice reached the decks of our boats. Walsh tried to step back, but his boots stuck to the frozen surface. He was being absorbed slowly, the ice creeping up his legs like it was alive. "Magnus," he shouted, "do something." I pulled out my emergency flare gun and fired directly at the glacier face. The red flare struck the ice and bounced off harmlessly. But for just a moment, I saw something that gave me hope. Where the flare hit, the ice cracked. Not much, just hairline fractures, but they were there. The supernatural ice could be damaged. The figures trapped inside the glacier had all turned to look at us now. Hundreds of faces pressed against the inner walls, all watching with hungry eyes. They wanted us to join them, to become part of their eternal frozen moment. But I wasn't ready to die. Not yet. And I definitely wasn't ready to spend eternity trapped in ice, reliving my last moments of terror over and over again. I grabbed the emergency axe from my boat and started chopping at the ice, holding Walsh's legs. Each blow rang like a bell, and with each ring, the voices of the trapped souls got louder. They were angry that I was fighting back. "Magnus, stop," Eric's voice pleaded. "You can't save him. You can't save any of us. Just let it happen. Let the cold take you." But I kept chopping. The ice was hard as steel, but it was starting to crack. And with each crack, Walsh's legs came a little more free. That's when the glacier itself began to move. The entire face of Muir Glacier was shifting, leaning toward us like a living thing. Chunks of ice the size of houses broke off and crashed into the water, but instead of sinking, they floated toward our position with deliberate purpose. I could feel the intelligence behind it now. This wasn't just supernatural preservation, T-Ness. It was a conscious entity that had been growing stronger with each soul it claimed. The rapid melting wasn't destroying it, it was releasing it from the constraints that had held it dormant. The Koshda Ka weren't individual spirits trapped in ice. They were all part of one massive, ancient consciousness that had been feeding on death and terror for millennia. And climate change was setting it free. "The whole glacier is alive," I said, more to myself than to Walsh. Walsh's legs came free with a sound like breaking glass. He stumbled backward, hypothermic but mobile. "We need to get to shore." But shore was covered in the same supernatural ice. Our only chance was to somehow break the pattern, disrupt whatever force was controlling the ice formation. That's when I remembered the most important part of Mary's stories. The Koshda Ka were vulnerable during moments of transition, when ice became water, when winter became spring, when the dead tried to claim the living. I pulled out my satellite phone and dialed the emergency contact for the tribal council. If anyone knew how to fight this thing, it would be the people whose ancestors had been dealing with it for thousands of years. Mary Kahat answered on the second ring. "Mary, this is Magnus. I'm at Muir Glacier, and we have a situation. The ice is moving on its own, and there are people trapped inside it." There was a long pause. Then, "You're seeing the Koshda Ka." "Yes, and they're trying to take us. How do I stop them?" "You can't stop them, Magnus, but you can break their hold." Fire and salt water, mixed with words of release. You have to give them permission to let go. "I don't have salt water. This is fresh glacier melt." "Your tears, Magnus, tears of genuine grief. The salt of human sorrow can break supernatural ice." I looked at the glacier face, where Eric's form was still pressed against the inner wall. My brother, frozen in eternal terror, begging me to join him rather than save myself. For the first time in 20 years, I let myself really grieve for him. Not just the loss, but the fear he must have felt in his final moments. The cold, the hopelessness, the realization that no one was coming to save him. Tears came easier than I expected. 20 years of suppressed sorrow, flooding out all at once. I fired my remaining flares at the glacier face while the tears ran down my cheeks. Where the fire touched ice moistened by my grief, massive cracks appeared. The bell-like ringing became a scream that echoed across the entire bay. "Let them go," I shouted at the glacier. "Let all of them go. Their time in the ice is over." The supernatural ice around our boats began to melt, but not into water. It evaporated directly into steam, releasing decades of trapped air that smelled like death and fear and endless cold. One by one, the figures inside the glacier began to fade. Not disappearing, but finally moving on. Eric was among the last to go. He looked at me through the melting ice and mouthed the words "thank you" before his image dissolved into nothing. But the glacier itself wasn't finished with us. As the trapped souls were released, the massive ice wall began to collapse. Without the supernatural force holding it together, 300 feet of unstable ice started falling directly toward our position. Walsh and I grabbed life jackets and jumped into the steaming water, just as the glacier face came down like an avalanche. The sound was indescribable, like the world ending in slow motion. The wave from the collapse threw us toward shore, through water that was alternately scalding hot and freezing cold, as the supernatural ice continued to dissolve. We were tumbled like leaves in a hurricane, unable to control our direction or protect ourselves from the chunks of normal ice that were raining down around us. I hit the rocky shore hard enough to crack ribs, but I was alive. Walsh washed up 20 yards away, unconscious but breathing. When the water finally calmed and the steam cleared, Muir Inlet looked completely different. The glacier had retreated almost half a mile, and the water was littered with ordinary ice chunks that were already melting in the warm air. The research boat was gone, along with any evidence of the supernatural ice formations. If not for Walsh's testimony and my own injuries, no one would believe what had happened. But I knew the truth. The Costa Ka were real, and they'd been growing stronger as the climate changed and the ancient ice began to melt. This incident was just the beginning. The official report called it an unusual glacial collapse event. The missing research team was listed as lost in an ice avalanche, their bodies presumably buried under thousands of tons of debris. Walsh and I were commended for surviving the disaster, though our accounts of the incident were heavily edited in the final documentation. Walsh requested a transfer to a warmer climate. I don't blame him. Dr. Chen's research notes, recovered from the wreckage, showed water temperature readings that defied physics. In the 3 days before they disappeared, their instruments recorded localized areas where water was simultaneously freezing and boiling. The graduate student's final radio transmission, barely audible through static, included the phrase, "They're still moving inside the ice." I spent the next 3 months learning everything I could about Tlingit's spiritual practices. Mary Kahat was a patient teacher, though she made it clear that I was starting 20 years too late. "The old ice is melting everywhere," she told me. "Not just here, but across the Arctic. Things that were safely frozen are waking up. The Costa Ka are just one kind of spirit that ice can trap." She taught me the proper words for releasing trapped souls, the correct combinations of fire and salt water that could break supernatural ice formations. Most importantly, she taught me to recognize the signs of an active awakening before it became deadly. I've used that knowledge 6 times in the past decade. Twice at Glacier Bay, once at Mendenhall, 3 times at various locations along the Alaska Marine Highway. Each incident followed the same pattern: rapid, unexplained ice formation trapping people in supernatural preservation. The climate scientists are right that things are changing fast. But they don't understand that some changes release more than just carbon dioxide and methane. Some changes wake up things that have been sleeping in the ice for thousands of years. I'm 55 now, eligible for retirement, but I can't leave. Not when I'm one of the few people who knows what to look for, who understands that rising temperatures don't always mean safety. Last week, I got a call from a ranger in Denali. They've been having problems with ice caves that are forming in areas where ice caves shouldn't exist. Tourists keep going missing, and the search teams keep finding evidence that doesn't make sense. Modern equipment frozen in formations that look centuries old. I'm driving up there tomorrow, because the truth is, what happened at Muir Glacier wasn't an ending, it was a warning. The ice has been holding things for thousands of years, preserving them, keeping them contained. But that ice is melting now, everywhere, all at once. And everything it's been holding is starting to wake up. If you ever find yourself near a glacier and the ice starts forming where it shouldn't, remember what I learned. Fire and salt water can break the hold, but only if you act fast. And if you hear voices calling from inside the ice, promising that the cold doesn't hurt, don't listen. Some ice has been frozen for good reasons. When it melts, everything it's been holding comes out. And not all of it wants to rest in peace.